Document. Part 6. The aftermath of the skirmish left the camp in disarray. Scattered tools, torn tents, and spent ammunition littered the ground, a grim reminder of how close they had come to disaster. The team worked quickly to clean up, their movements mechanical as adrenaline gave way to exhaustion. Fires were relit to provide warmth and light, though the flames cast long, uneasy shadows across the valley floor. No one spoke much. The weight of what had just happened hung heavily in the air. Daniel knelt beside Ember and Ash, his hands trembling slightly as he checked them for injuries. Both creatures seemed unharmed, though their chirps were quieter than usual, tinged with fear. They pressed close to him, seeking comfort, their glowing scales dimming and brightening rhythmically as if mirroring his emotions. He stroked their heads gently, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay, even though he wasn't entirely sure it was true. Laura sat nearby, her tablet balanced on her knees as she reviewed footage from the perimeter cameras. Face was pale, her green eyes wide with worry. "They'll be back," she said finally, breaking the silence. "That attack was just a test. Next time, they'll come prepared." Daniel nodded grimly. "We need to figure out how to stop them." "Before that happens," Kellen approached, his expression hard but weary. For once, there was no trace of arrogance in his demeanor and determination. "We can't fight them off forever," he admitted. "Not without reinforcements or better defenses. But we also can't leave this place unprotected." "Then what do you suggest?" Daniel asked, standing up. "We can't just hand over Ember and Ash. You saw what those scavengers wanted. They're not here to negotiate." "I know," Kellen replied sharply. "Which is why we need to use every advantage we have, including those creatures." Daniel frowned, glancing at Ember and Ash. "What do you mean, the carvings?" Laura interjected suddenly, her voice rising with excitement. "Remember what I said earlier about the planet retaliating if the Guardians are harmed?" "Yes," Daniel said cautiously, "but we don't even know what that means." "Maybe we don't need to," Laura continued, her fingers flying across the tablet's screen. "Think about it. This planet has already shown signs of being alive in ways we don't fully understand. If these creatures are tied to its ecosystem, maybe they can tap into that power when threatened." "You think they can fight back?" Kellen asked skeptically. "It's possible," Laura replied. "Look at how intelligent they are. Look at how they respond to emotional cues. Maybe their abilities go beyond what we've seen so far." Daniel hesitated, considering her words. It sounded far-fetched, but then again, so did everything else about this mission. "If you're right," he said slowly, "then we need to figure out how to prepare them for their sake and ours." Over the next few hours, the team focused on two tasks: fortifying the camp further and testing Laura's theory. While engineers reinforced barriers and set up additional traps around the perimeter, Daniel worked with Ember and Ash, trying to coax out any hidden abilities they might possess. He started by mimicking scenarios they might encounter during another attack, using gestures and sounds to simulate danger at first. The creatures seemed confused, chirping nervously and darting around the makeshift training area. But as Daniel repeated the motions, something began to change. Ember's scales shimmered brighter, pulsing with an intensity that matched the urgency of the situation. Then, without warning, a burst of fiery energy erupted from its mouth, sending a wave of heat rippling through the air. The sudden display startled everyone, including Ash, who let out a sharp chirp and backed away. "Did you see that?" Laura exclaimed, rushing over with her tablet in hand. "That's incredible." Daniel stared at Ember, equally stunned. "Didn't think they could do that." "It makes sense," Laura said excitedly. "Fire is a common defense mechanism among predators or protectors. If Ember can produce flames, then Ash might have a similar ability." Encouraged by the discovery, Daniel turned his attention to Ash, repeating the same exercises. This time, the results were different. Instead of fire, Ash emitted a soft, golden glow that spread outward like a shield. The light enveloped both Daniel and Ember, creating a barrier that felt warm and protective. When Daniel reached out to touch it, the surface rippled faintly, as though made of liquid energy. "They're amazing," Daniel murmured, watching as the glow faded. "These aren't just instincts, they're powers. They're tied to their emotions." Laura nodded, typing furiously on her tablet. This changes everything. If we can teach them to control these abilities, they might stand a chance against the scavengers. Kellen joined them, his expression unreadable. It's impressive, he admitted reluctantly. But will it be enough? Those men won't hesitate to kill if they think it'll get them what they want. We'll make it enough, Daniel replied firmly. Don't have a choice. As night fell, the team gathered around the fire discussing their options. Laura suggested teaching Ember and Ash specific commands to trigger their abilities under stress, while Kellen proposed setting up decoys to lure the scavengers away from the camp. Everyone contributed ideas, their earlier tensions replaced by a shared sense of purpose. Ember and Ash stayed close to Daniel throughout the meeting, their chirps growing softer as fatigue set in. Despite the chaos of the day, they seemed content, their trust in him unwavering. Watching them, Daniel couldn't help but feel a surge of determination. These creatures weren't just rare discoveries, they were living beings, dependent on the humans for guidance and protection. He wouldn't let them down. By morning, the plan was set. The engineers rigged additional alarms and traps along likely entry points, while Laura encoded messages into the carvings near the stone structure, hoping to warn off future intrusions. Meanwhile, Daniel continued working with Ember and Ash, refining their newfound skills. Each session brought improvement. The flames grew steadier, the shields more durable. Though progress was slow, the bond between human and dragon deepened. With every passing hour, Kellen watched from a distance, his earlier disdain replaced by reluctant admiration. He still struggled to connect with the creatures directly, but he recognized the value of Daniel's efforts and the importance of protecting them. For the first time since arriving on the planet, he seemed genuinely invested in the missions. Success. As the sun dipped below the horizon once again, casting the valley in a soft purple glow, the team braced themselves for another long night. The scavengers hadn't returned yet, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. Tension lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of the planet's winds. Despite the uncertainty, there was a quiet strength in the group, a resolve, born not of arrogance or ambition, but of necessity. Together, they had faced danger and emerged stronger. And together, they would continue to fight, not just for survival, for something greater. Ember and Ash curled up beside Daniel, their breathing steady and calm. Their scales pulsed softly in the darkness, a gentle reminder of the power they carried within them. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side with courage, trust, and hope. Document. Part 5. The next morning arrived with a heavy stillness, the kind that made everyone uneasy. The mist hung lower than usual, clinging to the ground like a thick blanket and muffling even the faintest sounds. Daniel woke early, his body stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. He stretched carefully, trying not to disturb Ember and Ash, who were curled up beside him. Their tiny forms rose and fell gently with each breath, their chirps soft and rhythmic, a stark contrast. To the tension in the air, Laura was already awake, pacing near the edge of the camp with her tablet in hand. Her face was pale, her green eyes darting nervously toward the horizon. When she noticed Daniel stirring, she hurried over, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something's wrong," she said urgently. The sensors picked up movement last. "Night movement?" Daniel asked, sitting up quickly. "Where?" "Northwest of here," Laura replied, pointing toward the dense fog. "Not far, maybe half a mile. It could be animals, but I don't think so." Daniel frowned, glancing at the defensive perimeter the team had set up the previous evening. Motion sensors, alarms, and makeshift barriers surrounded the camp, designed to give them warning if anything or anyone approached. So far, nothing had triggered the alarms, but that didn't mean they were safe. "Did you tell Kellen?" he asked. Laura nodded. "He's organizing a patrol group now. You're going to check it out." Sure enough, Kellen stood nearby, barking orders to a small team of engineers and security personnel. His demeanor was calm but commanding, a marked change from the arrogance he had displayed earlier in the mission. Gone was the self-important prince. In his place was a leader focused on survival. "Stick together," he instructed firmly. "If you see anything suspicious, Report back immediately. We can't afford to engage unless absolutely necessary. Daniel approached cautiously, his boots crunching softly against the rocky soil. I'm coming with you, he said without hesitation. Kellen raised an eyebrow. You're needed here. Those creatures trust you. If something happens, they'll look to you for guidance. And if something happens to you, Daniel countered, we don't know what we're dealing with out there. You'll need someone who understands how this planet works. For a moment, Kellen hesitated, his gaze flickering toward Ember and Ash. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. Fine, but stay close. This isn't the time for heroics. With that, the group set off into the mist, moving silently across the uneven terrain. Daniel carried a handheld scanner, its screen glowing faintly as it tracked the energy signatures detected earlier. The readings grew stronger the farther they went, leading them toward a cluster of jagged rocks partially obscured by thick vines. Something about the area felt off. It was too quiet. Still, as they reached the rocks, one of the engineers signaled for them to stop. He pointed toward the ground, where several sets of footprints were visible in the damp soil. They were large, uneven, and clearly artificial boot prints, likely belonging to scavengers or poachers. Nearby, scraps of metal and discarded tools littered the area. Evidence of recent activity? They were here, Kellen muttered, crouching down to examine the prints more closely. And not long ago. Daniel scanned the surrounding area, his heart pounding. If they're close, we need to be careful. These people aren't here to make friends. Before anyone could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the mist, the sound of a branch snapping underfoot. Everyone froze, their hands instinctively reaching for weapons. Another noise followed, louder this time, accompanied by low voices, speaking in a language none of them recognized. Get down. Kellen whispered urgently, motioning for the group to take cover behind the rocks. They dropped to their knees, holding their breath as the voices drew closer. Through the haze, shadowy figures began to emerge, 3 men clad in rugged gear, their faces obscured by masks. Each carried a weapon slung over their shoulders, and their movements were deliberate, almost predatory. One of them held a device similar to the scanners used by the team, its screen flashing with data as he swept it over the area. They're looking for something, Daniel murmured, keeping his voice barely audible. Probably whatever they came here to mine? Kellen nodded grimly. Or maybe they're looking for the creatures. The thought sent a chill down Daniel's spine. If these scavengers discovered Ember and Ash, there was no telling what they might do. The dragons weren't just rare, they were valuable, possibly worth a fortune to the right buyer. And judging by the ruthless efficiency of the men before them, they wouldn't hesitate to capture or kill the creatures if it meant profit. Suddenly, one of the scavengers stopped, turning his head sharply toward the group's hiding spot. A moment Daniel feared they'd been spotted, but then the man shrugged and continued walking, apparently dismissing the noise as unimportant. The others followed, disappearing deeper into the valley. Once they were gone, Kellen exhaled sharply, his shoulders relaxing slightly. That was too close, he admitted, his voice tight with frustration. We can't let them get anywhere near the camp. We need to warn the others, Daniel said, already standing. If those guys come backhand, they will we need. To be ready? Back at the camp, the mood was tense. Laura greeted them anxiously, her tablet clutched tightly in her hands. What happened? She demanded, her voice trembling. Did you find them? Daniel nodded grimly. They're close, probably less than a mile away, armed and dangerous. Laura's face paled further. What are we going to do? For now, we fortify our position, Kellen interjected, stepping forward. Double the guards, reinforce the perimeter, and keep those creatures safe. If they come for us, we'll be ready. Over the next hour, the team worked frantically to prepare for the worst. Engineers adjusted the motion sensors, ensuring they would trigger alarms at the slightest disturbance. Security personnel distributed weapons and assigned watch rotations, while others reinforced tents and gathered supplies. Even Laura pitched in, using her tablet to map potential escape routes in case things went south. Ember and Ash seemed to sense the tension, their chirps growing sharper and more frequent. They stayed close to Daniel, pressing against his legs as though seeking reassurance. He knelt down, stroking their heads gently. "It's okay," he murmured. "We're not going to let anything happen to you," despite his words. The weight of responsibility bore down on him. Protecting the creatures wasn't just about keeping them safe, it was about preserving the balance of an entire ecosystem. If the scavengers succeeded in capturing or harming Ember and Ash, the consequences could ripple far beyond this valley. As night fell, the team settled into an uneasy vigil. Fires were kept low to avoid drawing attention, and conversations were limited to hushed whispers. Laura sat near Daniel, her tablet glowing softly as she reviewed the carvings she had been studying. "There's something else," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "Something I didn't mention earlier." "What is it?" Daniel asked, leaning closer. She hesitated, scrolling through images on her screen. "These symbols, they talk about protection. Not just from external threats, but from within. There's a warning here, buried in the text. It says that if the Guardians are harmed, the planet itself will retaliate." "Retaliate how?" Daniel pressed. "I don't know," Laura admitted. "But it's clear that this world doesn't take kindly to invaders. Maybe that's why the parents of Ember and Ash were killed. The scavengers disturbed something they shouldn't have." Daniel frowned, glancing at the creatures. "If that's true, then these scavengers are playing with fire, literally." Before Laura could respond, a sudden alarm blared through the camp, startling everyone. The motion sensors had been triggered. Instantly, the team sprang into action, grabbing weapons and taking defensive positions. Kellen barked orders, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Stay alert. Don't fire unless provoked." Moments later, the scavengers emerged from the mist, their weapons drawn and their expressions cold. They moved with precision, spreading out to surround the camp. The leader stepped forward, raising a hand to signal his men to hold their fire for. "Now, you've got something we want," he growled, his voice rough and menacing. "Hand it over, and no one gets hurt." Daniel glanced at Ember and Ash, who were crouched low, their scales dimming in fear. He knew exactly what the scavengers were after, and he wasn't about to let them take the creatures without a fight. "No deal," Kellen replied firmly, stepping forward to block their view of the dragons. "Leave now, or you'll regret it." The scavenger smirked, raising his weapon. Wrong answer. In that instant, everything erupted into chaos. Shots rang out, echoing through the valley as both sides exchanged fire. Daniel dove for cover, pulling Ember and Ash close to shield them from harm. Laura scrambled to grab her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen as she tried to activate the perimeter defenses remotely. Amid the confusion, Kellen shouted orders, directing the team to focus on driving the scavengers back. Though outnumbered, the humans fought fiercely, determined to protect the creatures and their camp. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The scavengers, caught off guard by the resistance, retreated into the mist, leaving behind only echoes of their footsteps. When the dust settled, the team regrouped. Their faces etched with the skirmish was clear. Supplies were damaged, and the stress of the encounter weighed heavily on everyone. Document. Part 4. The night was quieter than usual. The hum of the planet's winds barely audible over the soft chirps of Ember and Ash. Daniel sat by the fire, his mind racing with everything they had learned that day. The carvings, the metallic fragment, the realization that Ember and Ash were more than just animals. They were guardians of an entire ecosystem. It was overwhelming, but also deeply humbling. He glanced at the two creatures curled up near his feet, their glowing scales dimming as they drifted off to sleep. They trusted him now. He couldn't help but feel a heavy responsibility resting on his shoulders. Laura was still awake, hunched over her tablet in the flickering firelight. Her face was illuminated by the screen's glow as she pored over the images and notes she had taken at the stone structure. Every so often she would pause, her brow furrowing in concentration, before typing furiously again. She looked up briefly when she noticed Daniel watching her. "They're incredible, aren't they?" she said softly, gesturing toward the sleeping creatures. It's like they're part of something much bigger than us. Daniel nodded, leaning back against a rock. Yeah. Makes you wonder how many other worlds out there have secrets we don't even know about yet. Laura smiled faintly, though her expression quickly turned serious. Hey, we need to be careful, Daniel. If poachers or scavengers really were involved in killing their parents, can't assume they've left for good. Whoever they are, they'll probably come back if they think there's something valuable here. I know, Daniel replied, his voice low. That's why we have to stay alert. These creatures depend on us now. From across the camp, Kellen stirred in his tent, emerging into the cool night air. Looked less regal than usual, his ceremonial robes replaced by a simple jacket and trousers. His hair was disheveled, and his face carried the faint shadow of stubble. For once, he didn't seem concerned with appearances. Instead, he walked over to where Daniel and Laura sat, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said, his tone unusually subdued. About what happens next? Daniel raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Kellen hesitated, glancing at Ember and Ash before continuing. I've been thinking about what you both said earlier, that these creatures are sacred guardians. If they're as important as you claim, then protecting them isn't just our duty. It's our priority, but we can't do that alone. You're suggesting we call for reinforcements? Laura asked, tilting her head curiously. No, Kellen replied firmly. Not yet. Bringing in outsiders could make things worse. I'm saying is that we need to prepare ourselves, fortify this camp, gather more data, and figure out exactly what we're dealing with. If scavengers return, we need to be ready to defend ourselves and these creatures. For a moment, Daniel and Laura exchanged surprised glances. This wasn't the same arrogant prince who had tried to assert authority over the dragon's days. Earlier, something had shifted in him, perhaps a newfound sense of purpose. Or maybe just the weight of the responsibility they all shared. You're right, Daniel admitted after a pause. We can't rely on luck to keep us safe. We'll need better defenses. And we should start teaching Ember and Ash basic commands in case things go wrong. Commands, Kellen repeated skeptically. You think they'll listen to orders? Not orders, Daniel corrected. Guidance. They respond to emotions, not words. If we can show them what we want through actions, they might understand. Laura nodded enthusiastically. It's worth a try. And while you work with them, I'll focus on decoding more of those carvings. There's still so much we don't know about this place, or about their species. Kellen crossed his arms, considering their plan. All right. But we also need to address the energy readings. That machinery we found, it's proof someone's been here recently. We can't ignore that. Agreed, Daniel said. Tomorrow. We'll send a team to scout further into the valley. Maybe we can find traces of whoever left it behind. With that decided, the three of them dispersed, each retreating to their own thoughts. As Kellen returned to his tent, Daniel stayed by the fire, staring into the flames. Despite the challenges ahead, he felt a strange sense of hope. For the first time since arriving on this planet, the team seemed united not just in purpose, but in trust. The next morning brought renewed energy to the group. After a quick breakfast of ration packs and lukewarm coffee, they split into teams. Daniel took charge of training Ember and Ash, using gestures and emotional cues to guide them. At first, the creatures seemed confused, tilting their heads and chirping uncertainly. But as Daniel repeated the motions, they began to catch on. Come here, he said softly.
Crouching down and holding out his hand.
Ember immediately bounded forward, its tiny wings flapping excitedly. Ash hesitated for a moment longer before following, mimicking its siblings' movements. Daniel rewarded them with gentle pats and encouraging words. Reinforcing the behavior, Laura watched from nearby, jotting notes onto her tablet. This is fascinating, she murmured. They're learning so quickly. Do you think they'll remember these commands under stress? It's hard to say, Daniel admitted. But it's better than nothing. If danger comes, every little bit helps. Meanwhile, Kellen led a small team deeper into the valley to investigate the energy readings. Armed with scanners and recording equipment, they moved cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the soft ground. The mist thickened as they ventured farther from the camp, obscuring their vision and muffling sound. It felt like walking through a dream or a nightmare. After nearly an hour of searching, one of the engineers spotted something unusual, a series of deep gouges carved into the rocky terrain. They looked fresh, as though made by heavy machinery. Nearby, shards of metal glittered faintly in the dim light, scattered among the debris. "This confirms it," Kalan said grimly, picking up a piece of twisted alloy. "Someone's been mining here, probably stripping resources and leaving destruction in their wake." "And they killed the parents of those two," another engineer added, his voice tinged with anger. "Monsters." Kellen clenched his jaw, examining the area. "More closely, if they're willing to kill for profit, they won't hesitate to attack us if they think we're interfering. We need to warn the others." As the scouting team made their way back to camp, the mood grew increasingly tense. At the time they returned, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Daniel and Laura greeted them anxiously, eager to hear what they had found. "It's worse than we thought," Kellen reported, setting the shard of metal on a makeshift table. "Whoever was here wasn't just exploring, they were exploiting. Mining operations, possibly illegal, and definitely dangerous." Laura frowned, looking at the fragment. "Do you think they'll come back?" "It's likely," Kellen replied. "Which means we need to act fast, strengthen our defenses, gather more intel, and prepare for the worst." Daniel nodded, glancing at Ember and Ash, who were watching the group intently. "We'll do whatever it takes to protect them," he said firmly. "No matter what." That night, the team worked tirelessly to fortify their position. Engineers rigged alarms and motion sensors around the perimeter, while others reinforced tents and gathered weapons. Laura continued deciphering the carvings, hoping to uncover clues about the planet's history, or perhaps even its defenses. Kellen supervised everything, his earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet determination. Ember and Ash remained close to Daniel, their chirps growing softer as exhaustion set in. Though the threat of danger loomed large, the bond between the humans and the creatures only grew stronger. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance, one born not of power or authority, but of trust and mutual survival. As the fire crackled, softly in the background, Daniel leaned back against a rock, watching the stars peek through gaps in the mist. The galaxy stretched endlessly above him, vast and unknowable. Yet here, in this small corner of the universe, he felt a profound connection to Ember and Ash, to his team, and to the planet itself. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Document Part 3. The morning light filtered through the mist, casting a pale glow over the valley. The air was crisp and cool, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and alien vegetation. Daniel woke early, stretching his stiff limbs. As he emerged from his tent, Ember and Ash were already awake, their glowing scales shimmering softly in the dawn. They seemed restless, pacing back and forth near the boulders where they had first been found. Their chirps were sharper than usual, filled with an urgency that made Daniel uneasy. Laura appeared soon after, clutching her tablet and looking equally concerned. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice low. "They're acting differently." "Today?" Daniel nodded, crouching down to observe the creatures more closely. Ember nudged him insistently, its tiny claws scraping against his sleeve. Ash stayed a few steps back, its wide eyes darting around as though searching for something or someone. "Do you think they're trying to tell us something?" Daniel asked, glancing at Laura. "It's possible," she replied, tapping furiously on her tablet. "If they're intelligent, they might be trying to communicate danger or discomfort. We need to figure out what's bothering them." Kellen joined them moments later, still dressed in his rumpled ceremonial robes. He looked less irritated than the previous day, but no less determined to assert his authority. "What's going on?" he demanded, his tone clipped. "Why are they so agitated?" "We're not sure yet," Daniel admitted, standing up, "but we're working on it." "Working on it isn't good enough," Kellen snapped. "We don't have time for guesswork. If these creatures are as valuable as everyone seems to think, we need answers now." Before Daniel could respond, one of the engineers approached, holding a handheld scanner. "Sir," the man said, addressing Kellen, We've detected unusual energy readings coming from deeper in the valley. Could be some kind of interference affecting the creatures. Laura perked up immediately. Energy readings. What kind? The engineer hesitated, consulting the device. Hard to say. It's not natural, it's localized and pulsing irregularly. Might be technology. Kellen straightened, his interest piqued. Technology? You mean someone else is here? It's possible, the engineer replied cautiously. Could be scavengers, poachers, or even remnants of an old settlement. Without further investigation, we can't be sure. Daniel frowned, turning his attention back to Ember and Ash. Both creatures were now chirping loudly, their movements growing more frantic. Whatever it is, it's upsetting them, he said. We should check it out, but carefully. Kellen crossed his arms, his expression hardening.
Fine.
But I'm leading this expedition. My status demands it. No offense, Daniel interjected, but maybe someone with actual field experience should take point. These creatures trust me. If things go south, I might be able to calm them down. For a moment, Kellen looked like he might argue, but Laura stepped in before he could. He has a point, she said diplomatically. Daniel's connection with the creatures could be crucial if we run into trouble. After a brief pause, Kellen relented with visible reluctance. Very well, but I'm coming too. I won't be left behind while others make decisions for me. With that settled, the group prepared to venture deeper into the valley. Daniel took the lead, followed closely by Laura and Kellen, while the rest of the team spread out to cover more ground. Ember and Ash trailed behind Daniel, their chirps growing quieter as they moved away from the safety of the boulders. The terrain became rougher, the path littered with jagged rocks and thick clusters of glowing plants. The mist clung stubbornly to the air, making it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. As they walked, Laura kept her tablet active, monitoring the energy readings. It's getting stronger, she announced after a while. Whatever. It is, it's close. Sure enough, within minutes, they stumbled upon a clearing unlike anything they'd seen before. At its center stood a massive stone structure, weathered by time but unmistakably artificial. Carvings covered every surface. Intricate patterns etched into the rock that seemed to pulse faintly with the same energy detected by the scanners. The designs were unlike anything human or alien. They were ancient, otherworldly, and undeniably powerful. This is incredible, Laura breathed, her eyes wide with awe. She knelt beside the nearest carving, running her fingers lightly over the grooves. These symbols, they're linguistic, a written language. Daniel joined her, examining the carvings more closely. Can you read them? He asked. Not yet, she admitted, snapping photos with her tablet. But I can try. This could be a breakthrough, a way to understand the history of this planet and maybe even its inhabitants. While Laura worked, Kalen wandered toward the far side of the structure, his gaze fixed on something embedded in the ground. It was a metallic object, partially buried beneath layers of dirt and moss. He knelt down, brushing away the debris, to reveal what appeared to be a fragment of advanced machinery. Look at this, he called out, holding it up triumphantly. Proof of intelligent life, perhaps even the creators of these creatures. Daniel approached cautiously, inspecting the object. That doesn't look like something native to this planet, he observed. It's too refined, too precise. Someone brought it here. Whoever did probably killed the parents of those two, Laura added grimly, gesturing to Ember and Ash. Poachers or researchers either way. They left this place scarred. Her words hung heavily in the air, casting a somber mood over the group. Ember and Ash seemed particularly affected, their chirps fading into mournful whistles. They pressed closer to Daniel, seeking comfort. Kalen frowned, studying the fragment. More intently, poachers were involved, then we're dealing with criminals. Dangerous ones. We'll need to fortify our position and prepare for the worst. I agree, Daniel said. But we also need to protect these creatures. They're vulnerable without their parents, and if whoever did this comes back, they won't get another chance, Kalen interrupted firmly. I'll ensure it. Despite his bravado, there was a flicker of genuine concern in Kellen's eyes. For all his arrogance, he understood the gravity of the situation. Whatever secrets this planet held, They were tied directly to the fate of Ember and Ashand, possibly. Countless others like them. Over the next hour, the team worked together to document the site. Laura focused on deciphering the carvings, her fingers flying across her tablet as she cross-referenced symbols with known languages. Daniel helped, her offering insights based on his knowledge of alien ecosystems. Meanwhile, Kalen supervised the engineers as they set up additional sensors and defensive measures around the perimeter. By midday, Laura had made significant progress. "These carvings tell a story," she explained, pointing to specific sections of the structure. This planet was once home to a highly advanced civilization, one that revered these creatures as sacred guardians. The dragons weren't just animals. They were protectors, tasked with maintaining balance in the ecosystem. That explains why they're so intelligent, Daniel mused. And why they responded to emotional cues instead of commands. Exactly, Laura agreed. But there's more. According to these symbols, the Guardians required nurturing during their early years. Without proper care, they couldn't fulfill their role. That's why Ember and Ash are so dependent on us right now. Kalen listened silently, his expression thoughtful. "So they're not just valuable because of their potential power," he said slowly. "They're vital to the survival of this world." Yes, Laura confirmed. "Which means anyone who harms them is essentially destroying the planet itself." The realization weighed heavily on everyone. Ember and Ash weren't just rare discoveries. They were living embodiments of this planet's legacy. Protecting them wasn't just a moral obligation. It was a necessity. As the sun began to set, the team returned to their camp, bringing the metallic fragment and detailed scans of the carvings with them. Ember and Ash curled up beside Daniel, their chirps soft and content once again. Despite the challenges ahead, there was a sense of purpose in the era's shared determination to safeguard the creatures and uncover the truth about their origins. Kalen watched from a distance, his earlier frustration replaced by quiet resolve. For the first time since arriving on the planet, he seemed genuinely invested in the mission, not for personal gain, but for the greater good. There was pride, guilt, or something else entirely driving him. No one could say. But one thing was certain. The stakes had never been higher, and failure was not an option. Document. Part 2. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the valley in a soft, eerie glow. The golden streaks that once painted the sky were now replaced by deep indigo hues, and the mist thickened further, wrapping around everything, like a damp shroud. Daniel sat cross-legged on the rocky ground, his jacket pulled tightly around him to ward off the chill. The smaller of the two creatures, now affectionately nicknamed Ember by Laura, rested near his knee, its glowing scales dimming slightly as it settled into what looked like a relaxed state. Its larger companion, whom Laura called Ash, remained cautious, watching from a short distance with wide, unblinking eyes. Daniel couldn't help but marvel at how different the two creatures were despite their similarities. Ember was bold and curious, often nudging Daniel's hand or inspecting his equipment with childlike enthusiasm. Ash, on the other hand, was shy and reserved, flinching at even the slightest movement. Yet both shared an undeniable intelligence, their actions deliberate and purposeful. It was clear they weren't ordinary animals. Laura crouched nearby, her tablet balanced precariously on one knee as she recorded every interaction. Her fingers moved quickly over the screen, typing notes about the creature's behavior, their physical traits, and the sounds they made. She paused occasionally to glance up, her green eyes bright with excitement. "This is incredible," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "They're so responsive. I've never seen anything like it." Kellen stood a few feet away, arms crossed and jaw clenched. He hadn't said much since the earlier incident when the creatures had rejected his attempts to assert authority. His ceremonial robes, now dust-covered and slightly torn, added to his disheveled appearance. Though he tried to maintain an air of dignity, his frustration was evident. Every time Ember chirped happily in response to Daniel's gentle touch, Kellen's scowl deepened. "They should respect me," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for Daniel to hear. "I am royalty. My word carries weight across dozens of systems." Daniel sighed. choosing not to engage directly. Instead, he focused on Ember, who seemed content to curl up against his leg. "It's not about titles," he said calmly. "These creatures don't care about power or status. They respond to kindness and trust. Kindness won't get us answers," Kellen shot back, stepping closer. "We need results, proof of their value to the Council. If we can't control them, this entire mission will be seen as a failure." Laura frowned, looking up from her tablet. "Control isn't the goal here," she said firmly. "Understanding is. These creatures are intelligent, possibly sentient. Treating them like tools or weapons would be unethical." Kalen waved a dismissive hand. "Ethics are secondary to survival. If these things have potential, we must harness it before someone else does." His words hung heavily in the air, met with silence from the rest of the group. Even the engineers and security personnel exchanged uneasy glances. No one wanted to admit it, but Kellen's concerns weren't entirely unfounded. In a galaxy filled with rival factions and opportunistic scavengers, discoveries like this rarely stayed secret for long. Daniel broke the tension by reaching out to stroke Ember's head gently. The creature let out a soft coo, leaning into his touch. "We're not here to exploit them," he said quietly. "We're here to learn, to protect them if necessary." Alan opened his mouth to argue, but stopped abruptly when Ash suddenly darted forward, startling everyone. The larger creature moved with surprising speed, stopping just inches away from Daniel's outstretched hand. For a moment it hesitated, its luminous eyes locked onto his face. Then, slowly, it lowered its head, brushing its snout against Daniel's palm. A collective gasp rippled through the group. Even Kellen appeared momentarily stunned. Ash's action was a clear sign of trust bond forming where none had existed before. Daniel held his breath, afraid any sudden movement might spook the skittish creature. But Ash didn't retreat. Instead, it lingered, allowing Daniel to scratch behind its ear-like appendages. Laura grinned, snapping photos with her tablet. "This is amazing," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "They're responding to emotional cues." "Did you see how Ash reacted after watching Ember? It's learning from its sibling." Daniel nodded, his heart pounding. "It's almost like they're testing us," he mused. "Seeing if we're worthy of their trust." Kellen scoffed, though there was less venom in his tone this time. "Worthy? They're animals. Animals don't judge worthiness." "Maybe not on your terms," Daniel replied without looking up. "But maybe on theirs." The prince bristled, but said nothing, retreating to the edge of the group to sulk. Meanwhile, Laura continued documenting the scene, her enthusiasm infectious. She pointed out subtle details, the way Ember's scales shimmered brighter when it was happy, the faint humming sound Ash emitted when it felt safe. Each observation added another layer to the mystery surrounding the creatures. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped further, and the team decided to set up camp near the boulders where the creatures had first appeared. Tents were erected, supplies unpacked, and perimeter sensors activated to alert them of any approaching threats. Despite the cold, no one complained. The presence of Ember and Ash kept spirits high, their gentle chirps providing a comforting backdrop to the otherwise alien environment. Before turning in, Daniel volunteered to keep watch, knowing the creatures might become restless during the night. Laura offered to join him, citing her need to gather more data. Kellen, however, retreated to his tent without a word, clearly still upset about being overshadowed by Daniel's success with the dragons. Sitting beside the glowing embers of a small fire, Daniel watched as Ember and Ash curled up together nearby. Their tiny wings twitched occasionally in their sleep, and their breathing grew slow and rhythmic. Laura sat opposite him, huddled in a thermal blanket, her tablet glowing softly in the darkness. "They really do seem to prefer you," she said. After a while, breaking the silence, "Do you think it's because of your personality, or is there something else?" Daniel shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick. "Could be either. Maybe they sense my intentions. Or maybe it's just luck." "I doubt it's luck," Laura countered. "You've always been good with animals, Evan. The ones back home. Remember that stray dog you adopted last year? It took you weeks to earn its trust. But once you did, it followed you everywhere." Daniel chuckled at the memory. Dogs are easier to read then, whatever these are. Laura tilted her head thoughtfully. What do you think they are, Guardians? Pets. Something else entirely. I don't know, Daniel admitted. But I think we're only scratching the surface. There's so much we still don't understand. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to simply observe the sleeping creatures and listen to the distant hum of the planet's winds. The valley felt alive, pulsing with energy that neither science nor logic could fully explain. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Eventually, Laura yawned and stretched, setting her tablet aside. I should try to get some rest, she said, standing up. You'll wake me if anything happens, right? Of course, Daniel promised, offering her a reassuring smile. Good night, Laura. Good night, she replied, disappearing into her tent. Alone with his thoughts, Daniel leaned back against a rock, staring up at the stars. They were unfamiliar constellations, arranged in patterns that told stories he couldn't yet comprehend. Somewhere out there, beyond the reaches of human exploration, lay countless worlds waiting to be discovered. And here he was, sitting beside two of their most remarkable inhabitants. Ember stirred in its sleep, letting out a quiet chirp. Daniel smiled, reaching out to pat its side gently.
Don't worry,
he murmured. I'll keep you safe. In that moment, he felt a strange sense of responsibility, not just to the creatures, but to the planet itself. Whatever secrets this world held, he vowed to uncover them carefully, respectfully, not for fame or glory, but because it was the right thing to do. Unbeknownst to him, Kellen watched from the shadows of his tent, his expression unreadable. The prince had spent hours stewing over the day's events, replaying each interaction in his mind. Why did the creatures trust Daniel and not him? What was it about the biologist that made him so special? As much as Kellen hated to admit it, Daniel's approach worked. The creatures responded to kindness, patience, and understanding qualities. Kellen struggled to embody. Perhaps he thought bitterly he had underestimated the man. Perhaps he had overestimated himself. Either way, one thing was certain. The stakes of this mission had just gotten higher. Kellen wasn't about to let anyone, least of all, Daniel Carter, outshine him again. Document. Part 1. The sky above the planet was a swirling mix of deep purples and blues, streaked with faint golden clouds that shimmered like liquid metal. The air smelled strange, earthy but sharp, as if the ground itself exhaled secrets. Older than time, this small group of humans stood at the edge of a dense, mist-covered valley, their boots crunching softly against the rocky soil beneath them. They had traveled far from Earth to this distant world, seeking answers to questions they barely understood themselves. Daniel Carter adjusted the strap of his backpack, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that always seemed slightly messy no matter how much he tried to comb it. His hands were calloused from years of fieldwork, and his face carried the kind of weathered look that came from long hours under unfamiliar suns. Daniel had spent most of his life studying alien ecosystems, but nothing had prepared him for this place. It felt alive in ways he couldn't quite explain. Beside him, Laura Bennett tightened her grip on her tablet. She was shorter than Daniel. With curly auburn hair tied back into a loose ponytail, her green eyes darted around nervously, taking in every detail of their surroundings. Laura wasn't used to being so far from civilization. Her expertise lay in languages, not survival skills. But she'd volunteered for this mission because she believed it might be humanity's best chance to communicate with intelligent, extraterrestrial life. If there truly was anyone or anything out there worth talking to, she wanted to be the one to make first contact. Behind them stood Prince Kellen, dressed in ceremonial robes that seemed out of place among the rugged terrain. His posture was stiff, almost regal, as though he expected the universe to bow before him. Kellen was a member of the Galactic Council, an organization tasked with overseeing interstellar relations between species. He had insisted on joining the expedition despite having little experience with exploration or science. Now, to him, this mission wasn't about discovery. It was about proving his worth as a leader. The rest of the team consisted of engineers, medics, and security personnel, all waiting quietly for instructions. No one spoke much. The weight of the unknown pressed down on them, making even simple movements feel heavy. "All right," Daniel said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calm but firm. Let's move forward carefully. We don't know what we're dealing with here. Laura nodded, clutching her tablet closer to her chest. Do you think we'll find something? She asked hesitantly. I hope so, Daniel replied with a small smile. Otherwise, this trip will have been a waste of fuel. Kellen cleared his throat loudly, stepping forward. This is more than just a scientific endeavor, he declared, his tone dripping with authority. This is a historic moment for diplomacy. Damn. Whatever we encounter, remember that we represent humanity and my family's legacy. Daniel exchanged a quick glance with Laura, who rolled her eyes subtly. Neither of them particularly cared about Kellen's speeches, but they knew better than to argue. Instead, they focused on the task ahead. As they descended into the valley, the mist thickened, wrapping around them like a damp blanket. Visibility dropped rapidly, forcing the team to stay close together. The ground sloped downward gradually, dotted with clusters of strange plants that glowed faintly in the dim light. Some looked like oversized mushrooms, while others resembled twisted vines crawling across the earth. Every step revealed something new, something alien. Then, without warning, soft chirping sound broke through the quiet. It was high-pitched, yet melodic, echoing faintly off the rocks. Everyone froze, turning their heads toward the source of the noise. What was that? One of the engineers whispered, gripping his weapon tightly. I don't know, Daniel admitted, squinting into the fog. But let's find out. He took a cautious step forward, followed closely by Laura. The chirping grew louder as they approached a cluster of large boulders stacked unevenly against each other. Peering around the edge, Daniel spotted movement, a flicker of color darting. Behind the stones, he held up a hand, signaling for the others to stop. Crouching low, he leaned closer, trying to get a better view. That's when he saw them, two small creatures hiding in the shadows. At first glance, they looked like reptiles, covered in smooth, iridescent scales that shifted colors depending on the angle of the light. Their bodies were sleek and streamlined, with long tails tipped with tufts of fur-like material. Tiny wings folded neatly against their backs, too small to support flight but perfect for balance. Most striking of all were their eyes, large, luminous orbs that reflected intelligence far beyond any ordinary animal. Laura, Daniel breathed, motioning for her to join him. Look. She crept beside him, gasping softly when she saw the creatures. They're beautiful, she murmured. What are they? I'm not sure, Daniel admitted. But they're definitely not native to Earth. The creatures stared back at them curiously, tilting their heads in unison. One of them made a tentative step forward, its claws clicking softly against the stone. Daniel instinctively extended his hand, palm open and facing upward, a universal gesture of peace. The creature sniffed the air cautiously before letting out another chirp, this time softer and less wary. They seemed friendly enough, Laura observed, pulling out her tablet to record the encounter. Maybe we can try communicating with them. Before she could say more, Kellen pushed his way to the front of the group. Brushing past both Daniel and Laura, "Stand aside," he commanded. "Let me handle this," ignoring their protests. He knelt down and reached out toward the creatures, his expression stern. "You'll obey me," he said firmly, as though addressing subjects rather than wild animals. "I am your ruler now." Reaction was immediate and disastrous. Both creatures recoiled violently, hissing sharply and retreating deeper into the shadows. The larger of the two spread its tiny wings defensively, emitting a low growl that sent shivers down everyone's spines. Even Kellen flinched, though. He quickly masked his discomfort with a scowl. "What did I do wrong?" he demanded, turning to glare at Daniel. "Why won't they listen to me?" "You scared them," Daniel replied bluntly, resisting the urge to roll his eyes. "They're not soldiers or diplomats, they're animals. You can't just order them around." "Well, then what do you suggest?" Kellen snapped. "You can't afford to waste time coddling them." Daniel ignored the jab, focusing instead on the creatures. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand, again keeping his movements steady and non-threatening. This time, the smaller of the two creatures hesitated for a moment before inching closer. Its companion remained hidden, watching intently from the safety of the rocks. "It's okay," Daniel whispered soothingly. "I'm not going to hurt you." To everyone's surprise, the creature nudged his fingers gently, its scales cool and smooth against his skin. A ripple of excitement passed through the group, though Kellen looked increasingly irritated. "Why does it trust you and not me?" he muttered, crossing his arms. "Because I'm treating it with respect," Daniel answered simply. "Not fear or arrogance." Laura smiled faintly, jotting notes onto her tablet. "This could be significant," she said. "If these creatures are intelligent and I think they might be, then gaining their trust could be crucial." Kellen scoffed. "Trust isn't power. Authority is." Daniel didn't respond. He was too focused on the creature now leaning against, his leg chirping softly as though seeking comfort. For the first time since landing on this strange planet, he felt a spark of hope. Whatever these beings were, they deserved patience and care, not domination, and somehow he knew this was only the beginning.